So at day 30, where are we now?
So we're past day 0. We're past the installation. We're down the road.
How are we doing? Do we need to kind of step back and look and see how things are, or are we still waiting for that F5 to be configured before we get to day 30? We could be somewhere in between there. So John's going to kind of talk about day 30 and moving forward and how that looks for us. And if there's any questions, I kind of talk a little bit quick. Is something you guys want to shout out? Just ask and we'll go for it from there. Awesome.
So I actually chose this picture on purpose because this person's sitting here working and they're drinking Red Bull. And this reminds me of my life in operations because after the initial environment, was stood up, I'd have to do patching. And back in the day, patching was a very scary thing. We tried to avoid doing it if possible in some environments. When we did do it, we'd often do it late at night. And, just to make sure we were aware of patches that came out, because there's constantly, and across your entire software stack, there's new features, functionality, there's bug fixes, believe it or not everyone writes perfect code all of the time, coming out. And I would actually joke that I read storage array release notes to put myself to sleep at night, just to keep aware of what the new issues were. So this becomes the term. So we got to ask, are we running at our best? And so, is this environment still healthy? And so with this GIF or GIF, depending on which tribe you belong to, okay, is showing is we actually have health checks now built into the environment. And from this perspective, we've got the ability to actually look at the environment and see it's healthy. Now, it's great if you have health checks built into a product, but what happens when, God forbid, someone discovers a new bug or a new issue or a new recommended driver or something that's updated? These health checks, if we push out a new health check in the new version, but that new version fixes it, there's no point of necessarily putting out a health check that's tied to the same patch that fixed it. It's kind of circular logic there. So we needed a framework to actually be able to push out new health checks into an environment dynamically. And this is where the pieces came in. First, this came in on the vSAN side, and now it's come in 6.7 to the vSphere side, the ability to what we call online health. What this means is your vCenter is going to pull once per hour by default a JSON file and look for an updated list of health manifests. And if there is something about your environment, and it's actually going to also send some telemetry and some configuration, if there's something in your environment that matches a known pattern we have of a known issue, we're going to inject a new health check into your environment and review that state and surface that information as well as something actionable. So one of the rules that our engineering teams have agreed upon is if we're going to push this, we can't just scare you and say everything's on fire, it's about to be bad. There needs to be a KB article attached to it. There needs to be a step to a resolution or a mitigation or something like that. And what we're actually seeing now is we're seeing day 0 releases of a bug fix or a patch or an issue, and at the same time this health alarm is going live and saying, hey, this is something you should be aware of, this is critical. Because going back to that picture of the person sitting there drinking Red Bull, you couldn't stay up all night reading release notes and be aware of everything. And so what would happen is you would inevitably be hitting known issues, which we'll talk about more when we talk later about the support experience. But this is a big change. Now, it is worth noting that this connection back, this is a secure connection, this is a pull. How many of you today, I'm curious, just show of hands, how many of you operate in environments where your environment can reach the internet? Versus air gap. Anyone operating air gap environments where your environment can't phone home at all?
Some of those too.
Yeah. Okay, there's some secret squirrels in the audience, so I always laugh.
Is that dependent on a support contract being live or no?
No, this doesn't check your support contract.
Okay,
so.
that's interesting. Does it send serial numbers and stuff?
Not serial numbers, no. We don't. Actually, I have a full explanation of the manifest of what that is and how to.
Just trying to figure out whether I should send my demo environment there because I don't want to send no serial numbers.
No, definitely doesn't send serial numbers. It's all obfuscated information. It's all anonymous. We have a couple slides that show like from our environments and what it looks like on the support side. So even like down to IP addresses, MAC addresses, all of that is hashed out. You're not going to see it's just like Whiskey Tango Echo is the name of the drive or the name of the network, and it's just all kind of randomized on there. So from a support side, they see, okay, there's an environment with 12 hosts and there's an issue, and they can click around and see that. And John will kind of walk through that support experience on how we see the data. So that also gives the GSS, our Global Support Services team, access to see the environment when they're on the phone with the customer, or they're looking at the environment before the customer calls. They're proactive supporting.
Yeah, because we have some proactive support agreements. Like you've got the BCS and MCS groups where you have a dedicated team focused on your environment. Now they could build a dashboard of those guys, but that's typically
Yeah, and there's within that tool as well. So it allows the tech support agent on the line to be able to tie that environment to a ticket. So they can tie that together to show like this is the customer's environment that we're working with, this is the ticket that they opened with the problem, and we can kind of pull that all together. But like I said, we'll show you that it doesn't send serial numbers because those are the days of like, I'm not telling Microsoft that I installed this 60 times right at home. I
don't want to turn it off, right? This whole thing, so.
Yeah. So this is a very simple thing. So what this looks like from this is we're actually building data applications in terms of on that obfuscated data that's sent home in order to process and bring that back. And we're building these definition lists. Looking through this, we've got an example here, which Nigel can.
I don't know if it's a little washed out. Is it all right for you? I don't know how it is at home if it's washed out online, but I apologize for that. We can kind of go through this as it goes. And so what we're doing here is we're remediating a host. So we found an issue on this host with a network driver that could possibly cause a purple screen of death or a PSOD. So what we're doing is we're creating a new baseline, an update manager. So vSphere Update Manager. We'll create a baseline, and we're doing an extension baseline so we can grab that driver. And prior to this demo here, I've downloaded the driver, I've installed it into the environment, so it's out there.
The VMware Update Manager manages grabbing drivers.
And you can grab those. Sometimes I'm a manual guy, so I'm like, I'm going to grab the driver I want. I'm not going to worry about downloading it. But we're creating this. We're grabbing the attachment of the install patch or the install baseline that I've created. And then we're going to attach it to our host to see if the host is in compliance. And that'll come back and tell us, okay, this host is not in compliance, meaning that host probably needs the driver installed on it. And what we're doing here is checking the compliance, and you'll see it flip to 4 hosts are non-compliant. And that's showing 4 because we have 2 baselines on there. So we're going to stage that driver. And I'm only staging it on host 3 and 4 here because host 1 and 2 were healthy and they didn't have the driver problem. And now what we're doing is just quick kind of remediation staging of the driver first, and then remediation is going to kick off now. And we're still going to pick our 2 hosts. And we can even expand and see what's in those updates and see all the drivers that come with that update, just to be sure we're putting the right thing on there, double check admin stuff. Now, this is something that you're not going to do all the time. You're not going to go and just create baselines all the time. Sometimes you do it for an issue like this.
But if you already had a critical baseline, it probably would have grabbed the drivers
And this is a lab that we spun up last week, so it's kind of just out there. It doesn't have a lot going on with it, so we're adding that. So it's not something that an admin would have to do all the time. And here what we're seeing is it just going through. It's remediating our hosts. We see our last host offline. The rest of them will flip through. Actually, I think you probably speed that up a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a little washed out, but
it is a little washed out. Yeah.
Drain the hosts and.
Yeah. So what it's doing is it's evacuating the host of all the VMs, put it in maintenance mode, and then going through the update, and then removing from maintenance mode and bring it back in the cluster. And then the HA for this lab is turned off, but if the HA was turned on, it would go ahead and take care of the DRS, would move those machines around again for you. So at the end here, what we're seeing is our health as it plays here.
That alarm's cleared at that point.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, so the alarm will actually, if you play, just let it play there, John. So the alarm is still there. You'll see the 2 bottom hosts are okay. The top ones, we're just going to hit retest because it's polling every hour, but we fixed it quicker than an hour. So we're going to hit retest, and then we're going to get green lights. And now we don't have the PSOD issue on those machines. So that's kind of how vSphere Health works. It's very similar to vSAN Health, and we've kind of learned from them. So we've taken what vSAN Health has, and we're moving that into vSphere Health. We're also looking to kind of merge those 2 together at some point. So hopefully we'll be able to see them like on the same page. Right now they are in different locations, and we understand that's a little bit counterintuitive. So we want to make sure that we can fix that issue. So
if I can actually
have your
I'm
next
trying to
demo?
get to the tab.
Okay.
So in this demo, I'm actually going to run through one thing we've worked on is we're part of vSAN and part of being a hyperconverged storage system is making sure the environment is healthy. And one thing we're really stickler on is hardware driver and firmware, particularly for storage controllers. This is something that can make a great environment, just because obviously if the storage path has any type of hiccups or things like that. So we've actually built in some driver firmware management capabilities and worked with some of our hardware partners to build that in. And this used to be a standalone tool, but we've actually broke this into the actual VMware Update management experience. So if you go into a vSAN environment, it's going to look at the environment, and it's going to tell you if your driver firmware correct, but it's also going to identify where you can go from a baseline. So previously, if you were going to update an environment, I'd have to go to a compatibility list, and I'd have to check that, and then I'd have to check that on the server host for the version, then I have to go check the vSAN version, and I have to go check the driver firmware version. And so this was basically what I always jokingly refer to, especially in the fiber channel era, trying to align the stars and figure out the lowest common denominator of what I could uplift everything to. And so we've just decided to bake that into the product. Since that was a lot more work than it really needed to be. So this environment, it's identified. We've looked at the build recommendations that this environment is currently at 6.5. It's going to go to 6.7. So in that case, we're going to go to updates. There's actually already a baseline that's been created for you. It's a read-only baseline that's going to tell you where you can go and what you can update to safely. But in this case, we're going to say that we want to remediate using that baseline. And that's going to go through that same process. It's going to say accept. I accept the new version. EULA. It's going to identify those hosts that are currently on that version, and it's going to go through that host. It's going to go through that remediation process, drain the hosts, evacuate the virtual machine, sync them off, running memory state somewhere else, and then update those hosts and bring that back, and cover that driver, that firmware, that vSphere version, all of that code in one seamless kind of hit in regards to that. So this is something that a lot of customers have asked because they didn't want to have to go manage multiple lifecycle tools to handle the core capabilities. While I do love ILO and iDRAC and CIMC and all these out-of-band utilities, having to go there, and having to coordinate that across multiple elements, it was just a lot of extra work, or having to deploy a third-party lifecycle tool just to handle that for that purposes. This is something we've heard a lot of complaints about, and so we've tried to listen to our customers and try to go through with this in that regard. Anyone love updating their environment?
I live for it.
Only when it works.
It always worked for me. I was a big fan of, attach baseline, upload ISO, yell YOLO in the data center very loudly as master remediate, disappear to lunch. That always freaked people out. Start patching. I'm like, I'm going to lunch. Call me if there's anything you need. Ops guys get really twitchy when you start a patch that you then abandon. So in regards to that. So the other thing also, when we started talking to customers about how they did patching, there were a lot of people out there who would do patching through CLI or other methods. And one thing we discovered that was actually a reason for this is that historically our auto-updating utilities would actually have to reboot twice. They would reboot once to stage, then reboot again. And if you have a host with a lot of RAM and a lot of direct RDMs and things like that, this could be a really long process.
Yeah, so this is kind of like, that free feature or that nice feature that came in 6.5. So customers that are on 6.5 going to 6.7 can leverage this. This is built into the software. It's not a hardware function. You don't need a new piece of hardware or server to make this work. And this is just applicable again to 6.5 to 6.7. And what we're doing, like John said, is we're removing that first reboot, right? So we normally would attach the ISO, reboot, do all the installs, reboot again. And imagine, tenfold, thousands of hosts that you're doing, and then taking out that extra reboot, because we know reboots are fairly quick, right? So that would definitely take your maintenance window time down quite a bit, or maybe even keep you under the SLA.
Yeah, if you've got a 64 node cluster and you're sitting there staring at, through that whole reboot cycle twice for each.
And then we also have another feature called Quick Boot. So Quick Boot is a feature specific to 6.7. So this does not come in 6.5, and it is hardware specific. So there's a short HCL list of Dell, as well as Dell EMC, as well as HPE that have.
There's a couple others been added.
There is a couple others, but the problem with that is specifically vendors are changing hardware, so we can't ask them to adopt in the middle of their cycle. So we have to kind of wait for those things to happen. So we are working with other OEMs to make sure they can get on board. The big box names out there. We're hoping to join this program, but this is specific to hardware. And what we're seeing here is two screens. So this is our traditional side here, and by the time this was loading all of its drivers, the other side was done. So in Quick Boot, what we're doing is just pausing that driver update, and then we're just flipping the
We're using the EFI to
hypervisor.
basically stun the host, and that way we can skip the entire BIOS boot cycle. All the post, all the hardware checks, sitting there scanning how much RAM, how many NICs, letting them all go through Pixie boot,
right.
Scan attempts and all that. You can skip all of that. And so this is something that is in orders of magnitude. And again, going from 2 reboots to 1, massively collapsing the reboot time, other improvements under the hood for how we handle boot. This helps people get those reboot cycles. Because one thing when you start talking to some of the larger customers that we had was that a lot of them would say, well, the reboot, the update window takes so long, I have to schedule this after hours or on the weekends, or I can't do it, or I only have a 2-hour maintenance window and it was taking 5 hours. We had to find ways. And so some of those were simple. Some of those were thinking a little outside of the box with this quick boot technology. Actually watching this in my lab and sitting there staring at the KVM, I mean, this looks like magic to me. But